class. So this is an important event of the life of the student body at ISU. This is the culmination of months of works, tireless days and weekends, a lot of deliverables, and we are very fortunate that they will share with us today their findings. And I also want to welcome the participants coming from outside that are being with us today, but also my colleagues from the faculty that did a good work in overseeing the project and working with the team. And without further ado, as president, I give the word to Bertrand Goldman, that is here to serve as MC and also help to supervise part of the project.
Thank you, Nicolas. Yes, dear students, dear partners, Matthieu and Matthieu, dear guests here on Central Campus and online, dear colleagues, dear parents and friends, I see a few in the room and also online. Welcome to this last academic activity of the academic year 2023-2024 of the Master of Space Studies of the International Space University, so class MSS24. So dear students, you've worked hard since October on your team project dedicated to the evaluation of the environmental, economic and societal costs and benefits of space projects, together with your partners at ESA and Airbus. The past months and years have raised dramatically the attention of the public and decision makers on the impact of human activities on the environment, the economy and the societies, and this is feeding strong uncertainties and divisions within our societies. It is therefore particularly important to have academic research and students shedding light on those questions for the decision makers, ultimately for the citizens, and this is exactly what you have done over the past 7 months. So here you are going to present us with the result of your work. You've got 60 minutes. Thanks.
Well, welcome everybody here in the audience. Welcome everybody who may be joining in the Zoom. Welcome also everybody who is watching us from YouTube. We are thrilled to be here to present to you what it is our final presentation for the team project. The team project is an ISU trademark. It is an annual piece of work that we have to work on it, all the students, in a joint effort. And we are very lucky this year to count on the partnership of flagship companies like ESA or Airbus. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Matthieu, for being here. Thank you to Professor Goldman and all the other faculty members for being here. The TP, the team project, consists of 2 different phases. The first phase is the literature review. The second phase is working on the actual project. Now, we've been working on this project with a whole MSS24 class, but today with me, I will have my colleagues, Anjali, Aude, Robert, and Alicia, and myself, CEST. So now I will be presenting to you what will be the different contents that we will cover throughout this presentation. In the introduction, we will touch on the context and also the project motivation to develop this project. Also, in the scope, Robert will explain us what are the key terms to understand and to go through the methodology. Later on, in the methodology, we will go step by step, walking you through how our methodology works. Also, we will show you how it is applied to the real world with a case study. Later on, we will show you about the uncertainties that we have found, and also we will be doing the conclusion recommendations. Now, on to the introduction. We have sustainability and space. So, in the sustainability context, what we see is a current trend of an increased sustainability consciousness. We see this throughout surveys, in which, for example, in this one that you can see here on the screen, Americans were asked whether how important for them it was the environment in the next 5 years, and they pointed out that climate change was an important thing for them and that they were worried about it. Also, we get to know about it by also legislations and different types of policies. Like, for example, in the form of governmental initiatives and also in international agreements. Like, for example, the Paris 2015 conference that was held and which meant a global effort to fight against climate change. Also, we see it every day more and more, with more people rallying to support this cause. And also, we see it from the social sustainability aspect of it, seeing that there's more and more within the younger generations an eco-anxiety thing going on, which drives the consumers to go for more sustainable products. So, also, we see that there is a need to consider the global sustainability standards, like, for example, the United Nations SDGs. And also, we see that space has no regulations in terms of sustainability yet. Then, we go into the space sector context, and we see that there is an increased use of space technologies. We can see this in the form of a downstream strategy that ESA is doing to perform a tech transfer of space technologies. Also, we see it more and more with launches into space skyrocketing during the last 10 years. And this will not only but increase, because there is more and more investment in the space sector, as you can see here. So, what we have here now is we have sustainability and the space sector. And we have the space sector, which is growing more and more, and we have sustainability awareness. So what we're trying to do with our project is merge these two together by developing a methodology to address the sustainability of space activities. This methodology should apply to all space organizations, say private or public. Also, we want to embrace the interdisciplinary aspect that we have been learning throughout this year in ISU by applying our methodology to most space activities. So not only to space exploration, but also to Earth observation and telecommunications, to say a few. Okay, so as I said to you, the first phase of the TP was a literature review, in which we did a thorough research on these current topics that I have introduced for you. First, we learned about the concept of footprints and handprints. Footprints being the negative impact on the sustainability, and handprints being a very novel concept, which is the positive impacts on sustainability. Also, we saw that sustainability could be comprised in what it was said, the three different pillars, like, for example, society, economy, or the environment. We saw that there is not many sustainability methodologies that cover the downstream of space missions. And we also learned a lot about the existing methodologies that there are right now, like, for example, the LCA in the space industry, which focuses mainly in the upstream, and also an ESA-provided methodology, which also considers the handprint concept. With that, and also considering other industries, like, for example, the aviation industry, we have learned a lot, and we came to some conclusions, which now my colleague Alicia will explain for you.
Thank you, CEST. Now, we reached three main conclusions from our literature review. The first one being that there is a lack of a sustainability methodology for the downstream segment of space, as other methodologies that we have found in other industries. There is a lack of development also of the handprint. This is a very new concept, and also there isn't a very well-developed definition and consistent for the footprint. Additionally, a three-pillar approach is needed to have a full sustainability view. This means that the sustainability lies in the balance between the economic, environmental, and social pillar. We reached a number of recommendations that we wanted to follow when developing our methodology. The first one being that we need to cover the three pillars of sustainability as defined by the UN. These are economic, social, and environmental. We need to focus more on the handprint. As we said, we need to define clearly and have a consistent definition for it. And it needs to be both applicable to government and private. As the private space sector is growing more and more, we need to also consider it into the sustainable actions that they need to take in the future. We also need to consider both quantitative and qualitative metrics, as for instance, we may have quantitative impacts, like the number of jobs created in economics, or qualitative ones, as the increasing quality of life for social. And finally, we also need to clearly define the system boundaries of our methodology. For instance, we need to consider how we are going to address the direct or indirect impacts. That's why we developed the VSA methodology. The Vitruvian Space Assessment, or the VSA for short, is a tool designed to help decision makers to evaluate the impact of a space project according to sustainability. It is based on the idea, the name, of the artwork of Leonardo da Vinci, the Vitruvian Man, which represents an ideal of the proportions of the human figure. And it was this ideal and this example that we wanted to follow as a methodology that the space sector can follow in our case. What the VSSA does is to analyze, according to the space mission, the industries and the three pillars. These are environmental, social, and economic, and to compare projects against each other, and finally evaluate their development and potential impact. Now we're going to go through the scope of our methodology, which will be explained by Robert.
Thank you, Alicia. So now that we've gone over our key takeaways from the literature review and introduced to you the three pillars of sustainability, which we identified for our project, let's talk a little bit about our scope. We'll start off with how we developed our team. We split our team into three deliverables, namely scope, methodology, and case study. Scope focused on identifying key terms and establishing our system boundaries. The methodology built the methodology and built on existing frameworks such as the socioeconomic impact assessment. Case study studied the GTIF application and then later applied the methodology to this. All the teams worked hand in hand and the case study and methodology were giving the scope, key definitions, and they're keeping the project within its core concepts. The case study was helping the methodology in giving feedback to the methodology for gaps and ambiguity, while the methodology gave the case study instructions step by step. Now the system boundaries. We focus solely on the commercial applications since we found in our literature there was a lack of methodology for this. We wanted to focus on things such as climate change, ecosystem health, socioeconomics, and more. We aren't omitting military applications since this would have complicated our scope. Next, we made no distinction between direct or indirect impacts. This means there's no defined boundaries, and we think this ensures there are fewer risks of misuse to our methodology. Lastly, we narrowed down to the downstream missions, which are Earth observation, satellite navigation, telecommunications, and science and exploration. If you're unfamiliar, Earth observation refers to monitoring Earth's topography to identify indicators such as soil moisture or vegetation health. Satellite navigation is the timing, positioning, and navigation, for example, GPS or Galileo. Telecommunications, it's in the name, but this service provides communications for users worldwide, and it's what's allowing us to have guests over Zoom today. Science missions includes both uncrewed and crewed missions. Now for some key terms. Keeping with our context, we're sticking with the downstream segment, which is utilizing data and services derived from satellites. We're omitting the upstream segment, which is everything up to the point of launch, including manufacturing and launch itself. Now, two of the most important definitions we have are handprint and footprint, which Cess mentioned before. Handprints are the direct and indirect positive impacts across all the three pillars which we identified, while footprints are the negative impacts. An important note here is that handprints do not include the reduction of a footprint. And some key terms for our methodology, which go over the inputs and our outputs, which are the end goals. Impact indicators are our inputs, and they are quantitative or qualitative metrics or raw data, which represent both the handprint and the footprint. An example of this would be CO2 emissions, which represent the positive or negative impact of a decrease or increase of emissions, respectively. Several impact indicators add up to one single KPI, or key performance indicator, which again is a cumulative measure of a handprint and a footprint, and these are exclusive across the three pillars. Following this example, we arrive at air quality. Once we've identified all our KPIs, we reach our end goal, which is an overarching sustainability goal set at an organizational level. An example of this would be the UN SDGs, and following our example, we would have SDG number 13, climate action. To summarize, multiple impact indicators add up to one KPI, and KPIs across all three pillars add up to a single end goal. How we go from impact indicator to end goal will now be further developed in the next methodology section by my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Robert. So thank you for explaining these concepts that will be crucial for now getting into the core of the methodology, of the project, which is the methodology. So, as you can see, this is the big picture of the methodology. As you can clearly see, it's comprised of 4 different steps. The first being the classification of downstream applications. Step 2 and 3 being the identification of impact indicators, or I squared, as you can see. And also the methodology assessment. These are analyzed pillar-wise. This means that there is an analysis for the pillar of economy, environment, and social. And last but not least, we have the step 4, which is the overall sustainability evaluation. These different steps will be explained by my colleagues Anjali and Alicia, and they will be playing a sort of tennis match with Aude, who will be at the same time concurrently explaining you how these different steps are applied in our case study. But before, I'm going to explain to you how we are planning to identify stakeholders with our methodology, and also what is the relation between the different indicators that Robert has now explained to us. So, the relation of these different indicators in the context of our methodology, it's pretty simple. We have the I squared, as you can see here. We have 3 different handprints, that is positive effects. The top 2 are environmental handprints. The lower one is a societal handprint. And as you can see, the top 2 I squared contribute and determine what is the score of a KPI. So these different impact indicators provide to air quality with a 1 to 5 score. These, at the same time, air quality and quality of life, for example, here, as you can see, are the KPIs, also help to determine a score for the end goal. Now, to give a good example that we are all more or less familiarized, we are going to use the SDGs, which every SDG represents an end goal. So in this case, for the air quality and quality of life KPI, add up to the sustainability cities and communities, sustainable cities and communities SDG. So now on to the consulting stakeholders. This is a process that will be done throughout the whole methodology. Thus, that's why we coin it a concurrent step. Yeah? There's also 2 types of stakeholders, internal and external. Internal being those within the organization, like for example, employees or the board of directors, and external, like for example, the I don't know, governments, clients, suppliers, local authorities, and so on. But to perform this stakeholders identification, it is crucial to understand the local, regional context in terms of the 3 different pillars: environment, economy, or social. And also, it is important to ask yourself, as a company, as a user of the methodology, am I doing a prospective or a retrospective analysis? Prospective analysis is those in which you're doing projections and which are related to space missions that are still not done. This means that to get the stakeholders of these type of missions, of prospective types of mission, what you need is to do a thorough desk research and to identify them. Also, we have the retrospective approach, which is gathering the data once the activity is done. For example, in ongoing missions or missions that are already finished. So to do this, basically, how to identify the stakeholders in retrospective approach, you just need to perform a very good identification of the different components of the value chain. Now, my colleague Aude will explain to you what is the case study that we are applying our methodology to.
Thank you, CEST. So I'll be explaining how we're applying the methodology to the case study. And for the case study, we decided to go with GTIF. And GTIF stands for Green Transition Information Factory. So GTIF is a website platform led by ESA, and it provides information, so actionable information, as you can see here, from Earth observation to accelerate the green transition of society and economy. So one of the main reasons we decided to go with this case study is that it already provides information on all of the 3 pillars that we wanted to address. So that is the environment with the green transition, society, and economy. Another aspect that made us choose this case study is that the information was already divided into domains and tools. So as you can see here, the green transition domains are the 5 that are represented here. So the energy transition, the mobility transition, sustainable cities, carbon accounting, and EO adaptation services. So in the case of GTIF, it uses mostly Earth observation data, but it also uses GNSS data for some of its tools. Another thing to note here is that since this was recently released, the analysis that we're going to perform is going to be a prospective analysis because not many stakeholders have been using it yet. So to give you a more visual representation of what GTIF looks like, this is the website that we can access on the internet. And you can see that the information is divided into domains, which are represented in the top left. And so for example, if you click on carbon accounting, you can access the tools that are here. So for example, forest analysis. And within these tools, it is again subdivided into different layers. So for example, above ground biomass. And in total, there are 5 domains and 62 tools. And this is represented in the map that you can see here. Another thing to note is that GTIF represents information for now of Austria, and it is meant to be expanded to other countries. So now going with the concurrent step that was presented before, this is the identification of stakeholders. And as you can see here, we identified for GTIF both internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. So the internal stakeholders represent those who contributed to the development of GTIF, and also companies or data platforms that GTIF uses in order to provide its own information. So this includes, for example, ESA, EuroDataCube, and EOX. On the side of the external stakeholders, these are the stakeholders that are using the application of GTIF, so the information provided by the platform. And this includes, for example, the Federal Ministry of Austria, DLR, or even the general public that can download the information from the website. And now I'll be passing to Angeli to explain steps 1 and 2 of the methodology.
Thank you, Ode. So finally, we've reached the part of this presentation which we're most excited to share with you all. That is a step-by-step process of how our methodology can be used. So the step 1, as you can see, is the identification of downstream applications. So our methodology is taking a very downstream specific view. That means that we're going to look at each mission and look at the downstream projects or applications of that mission, which is data deriving from one of the 4 missions which Robert earlier explained. So what identifying the downstream applications means is that we want to see how the downstream space project can be used for any application in the real life world. And why we're doing this is that this is very essential to eventually identify an impact of this application, and which is what we consider as an impact indicator in the later steps. So now let's get into the process. So here we have a downstream space project, and the very first question we ask is, what type of mission data does this platform or application provide? So based on the answer to that question, we get that it's either one of these missions or a combination of the missions available here. And that leads to the next question. What are the main sectors in which this can be applied to? So based on an answer from this, we're able to further categorize for whichever mission which is applied, where can this application exactly be located. So in our report, for all of the missions, we've included an exhaustive list of sectors with a possible application. And you can see a few examples here. So now let's go through a quick example of how we would actually implement step 1. So assume that it's a prospective downstream space project which we're planning. So the very first thing we do is we ask our internal stakeholders that what kind of data would we be including in this data platform? And they give us a response of GNSS data. So then we further ask questions to external stakeholders, potential users, experts, to understand where can this platform be used. And that's when we understand that it could be used in agriculture, transport, maritime, and consumer solutions. And then ahead with further research and analysis and more interviews, we're able to identify the exact applications, as the example you can see here in agriculture, that is in farm machinery positioning, data analysis tools, and guidance. So with that, we're able to identify the exact applications of our downstream project. And that's step 1. So now let's go to the step 2 of our methodology. That is the identification of impact indicators. So in step 1, we left the conversation at the applications being identified. Now, what we need to do here next is evaluate these applications. And for that, users need a thorough understanding of the applications and the possible impacts of that applications to eventually be able to categorize them as a positive or a negative benefit. So assuming that we've chosen a particular approach for our methodology, with the application, we'll be able to derive and identify the actionable information. And from those, we'll be able to identify a particular action or sets of actions which can be derived from that information. And finally, from that, we'll be able to identify the impact indicators, which can either be a positive handprint or a negative footprint. So let's see this with a very quick example. Now, assume that we are retrospectively evaluating the James Webb Space Telescope, and we're evaluating its data platform. So here, with interviews, we'll be able to identify that one of the actionable information would be the images from JWST. And some actions which should be done is scientists using this to look at specific exoplanets. And this would mean that a potential example of an impact indicator would be the number of publications. And here, in that case, it would be a handprint for us. So earlier, CEST took us to the relationship between KPI and impact indicators. And there are just 2 points from that conversation which I want to highlight because this will be very crucial for our conversation here and in the coming steps. So as you can see in the very first example of the impact indicator, eutrophication of fresh water, it leads into being a handprint for the KPI biomass and a footprint for the KPI biodiversity. Now, if we look at the example of KPI biodiversity, you can see that there are 3 specific impact indicators which are flowing into its collective value, with including 2 footprints and 1 handprint value. So the reason to highlight this is to show the different kinds of relationships which are included between an impact indicator and KPI. Now, next, we want to highlight how in our report we have included the relationship between a KPI and impact indicators. So as a part of our project, we have cataloged a set of KPIs and impact indicators for all 3 pillars, that is environment, economic, and social. And this is just a quick explanation on how to read the catalog. So we've included, for example, a pillar of environment, a KPI, which will be categorized into having several rows with impact indicators. And for each of those impact indicators, we'll have a column for the sector in which it's applicable, the impact unit, the impact indicator, which could either be a footprint or a handprint, the potential stakeholders, and a description of the impact indicator. We would have similar catalogs for both economic and social. So what's important to understand here is that for all 3 pillars, we'll be able to identify actions from a similar actionable information. What we also want you to notice is that if it's a retrospective approach, we can directly find the impact indicators from the action. So in our report, we have identified a set of 8 environmental KPIs, 11 economic KPIs, and 9 social KPIs. So this is not an exhaustive list of KPIs, but the beginning point of conversation, which we hope for users will take forward, implement, and further extend when they do their analysis. What we want to emphasize here is that every application could have several actions as a part of its portfolio. So it's really important to do an exhaustive analysis of all the actions for every single application. So with that, I pass the floor to Ode, who will explain how this was used for GTIF.
So how does this all look concretely in a case study? So for the case study, we first identified the data that we were using, which, as I mentioned previously, was both Earth observation and GNSS. And then from this, we realized that the actionable information was already identified on the platform. And so we decided to go ahead by identifying directly the actionable information and then the actions. So in total, in GTIF, we identified 24 actions. And this is, of course, a non-exhaustive list. And in this case, we're going to continue with 2 examples of actions. And in our report, these are the 2 actions that we elaborated on as well. So these 2 actions, we decided to go with 1 example of both Earth observation and GNSS data. And these are in 2 different domains of the energy transition and mobility transition. So for example, if you go with the energy transition domain, we get access to the tool of wind energy assessment. Within this tool, there are other layers of, for example, wind energy assessment and number of wind turbines. And finally, this leads to the actionable information of the wind energy assessment allows us to explore site suitability to create new wind farms. On the other hand, for the mobility transition, for example, the max congestion index leads to information, so it maps the roads and highways that are prone to higher and lower congestion. And so looking at this actionable information, we can identify the actions that potential stakeholders could use this information for. So again, for example, with the wind energy assessment, the exploration of site suitability and the location of existing wind turbines leads to the potential aspect of the construction of optimized wind farms. And then the other action that we identified is through the mapping of roads or through the proportion of motorized transportation compared to non-motorized transportation. This leads to the action of reorganization of public transport towards sustainability. Again, for this step, we also identified stakeholders as a concurrent step throughout the whole methodology, as is indicated on the right here. So for the rest of the case study, I'm going to continue with only one action just to show kind of the thought process that was behind it and how we went through the different steps of the methodology. And this action will be the construction of optimized wind farms. So the next step was the identification of impact indicators. For this identification, we really went through the tables that were provided by the methodology and as was presented earlier by Angeli, and going through each of these impact indicators, trying to see if they were relevant or not to the action that we were analyzing. So in this case, for example, if we look at the construction of optimized wind farms, one of the impact indicators was the increase in energy efficiency. And so of course, as we can imagine, the increase of energy efficiency is related to the optimization, the construction of optimized wind farms. However, on the other hand, the construction of these wind farms also destroys some habitat, which leads to the impact indicator of natural habitat destroyed on land. And so going through all of these, this list for all of the three pillars, we can identify the impact indicators that are here shown. Of course, just to mention, this is a non-exhaustive list for the environmental and economic pillars. And I'm going to pass the floor now to Alicia to explain the first step of step 3.
Thank you. So in this third step, we go into the assessment of the methodology. We need to consider, once again, 3 different analyses, once for each pillar, and it's subdivided into 3 sub-steps. In the first one, we need to gather the impact indicators data. In the second one, we need to go from the impact indicators to the KPI in the so-called black box. And finally, we need to perform a KPI weight assessment. In the first step, we need to consider 2 different approaches, as they were mentioned by CEST. This is a prospective for the case of potential and retrospective for tracking. First, we need to do expert interviews. These are questionnaires, or for example, we could use the Delphi method, which is an iterative method which applies different questions to experts. In the case of environmental, for example, we could interview not only activists and scientists, but also policymakers. Additionally, we also need to consult the stakeholders that we have previously identified, and we can do both specific and general questions according to our application. And we also need to gather the data using different known methods, and these known methods will depend and change according to the different pillar. In the case of environmental, we have, for the prospective case, the environmental impact assessment, or for the retrospective case, we have other ones as the narrative research or the Q methodology. In the case of economic, for the prospective case, we have the market valuation or the value of information. The market valuation can also be used for a retrospective case, as well as other methods as the revealed preferences. And here we can also do cost-based assessments to give a monetary value to the impacts. For example, either the cost-benefit analysis for quantitative or the cost-impact analysis for qualitative. And then finally, in the social, similarly to the environmental, we can do the social impact assessment for prospective case, and census data can also be really useful for the retrospective. Now, Odd will explain how this was done in the case study.
So you'll see that this step is not very long for the case study because we were unfortunately not able to contact that many stakeholders for the data acquisition. And so in this step, we mainly did an internet research to get the data that we wanted. So for each of the impact indicators that are here, we looked online to try to find quantitative values to represent each of these indicators. And as it's a prospective analysis, tried to forecast what would be the potential impact in the future quantitatively. So this is indicated here. So for each of the impact indicators, we tried to obtain a value. Again, just to note, these values are estimations, and the question marks represent when we weren't able to find a specific value. Now back to Alicia.
Now we need to go from the impact indicators to the KPIs in the so-called black box. This name is a bit of controversial, but what it means is that this step has not been fully developed, and it is still prone to change. Further development needs to be done by either future users or researchers. However, we have established a checklist of things that need to be followed, and in the end, the result that we want to achieve is a score that ranges from 0 to 5, as shown in the table, with 0 being that it's not applicable, 1 that it has no impact, and 5 that it has a very high impact, and so on. So this black box needs to have 3 considerations into account. The first one, it needs to consider different units. This is, for instance, we need to combine percentages with tons, with liters, and both qualitative and quantitative data. Additionally, we need to also give weights to these impact indicators. It can be done by using a materiality assessment, and we need to consider not only the impact of the I-square, but also the severity of that impact. And finally, it needs to include a mathematical model to be able to put together all these different metrics. This is a formula. For the case study, we developed a possible qualitative approach, which, with the tasks shown on the screen, which Odd will be explained better.
So what does this look like concretely? So this is the previous slide that I showed, indicating the quantitative values that we found for each of these impact indicators. As I mentioned previously, this is not an exhaustive list of the impact indicators, and so all of the impact indicators that we identified are represented here, and we really tried to find these quantitative values for each of these. So the easiest way that we found to try to get a 1 to 5 score for the KPI was to first assign a 1 to 5 score for each of these impact indicators. And so for each of these quantitative values, we converted it into a qualitative value of 1 to 5. So the question that we asked ourselves here is, what is the impact of GTIF on the impact indicator? So how can GTIF contribute to this impact indicator? So as was mentioned previously, all of the impact indicators are related to a specific KPI, and the larger boxes here mean that there are more than one impact indicator related to this KPI. So in addition to the score, the 1 to 5 score for each of these impact indicators, we also have to assign a weight. And this weight is based on the question that is here. So what is the impact of the I-square on the KPI itself? So maybe a way to represent this is, for example, if GTIF has an impact on both the dissatisfaction of customers and also on the mortality rate, the impact of GTIF on the dissatisfaction of customers could be very high, so a score of about 4, whereas the impact of GTIF on the mortality rate could be around 1. However, the relative weighting of these is not going to be the same. So, of course, for the mortality rate, the weighting could be, for example, 80% to make it have a bigger weight. And so from this 1 to 5 score and from these weightings, we can calculate a weighted sum for each of the KPIs to finally obtain a 1 to 5 score for each of the KPIs. And it's important to note here that the KPI calculated is only for one specific action, so it's an action-specific KPI. And in this case, it was for action 1, so just to remind you, for the construction of optimized wind farms. So once we calculated the KPI score for one action, we also need to calculate it for the next action, which was, in our case, reorganization of public transportation towards sustainability, but also for all of the other actions that we identified. So in our case, that was around 24. And then once we get the KPI score for each of these actions, we calculate the average of all of the KPI scores to finally obtain an overall KPI score for GTIF itself. And I'll pass the floor back to Alicia for step 3.3.
So now, in this final sub-step, what we need to do is to perform the KPI weight assessment. First, from all the identified stakeholders previously, we need to map the key stakeholders and how we're going to consider them in the weights So if we are going to consider them, all the stakeholders equally, not to quote Animal Farm, but some stakeholders may be more equal than others. Then we also need to identify the areas of impact. This is the end goals. These end goals can either be, for instance, the SDGs, or in the case study, we used our interpretation of ISA sustainability objectives, or for company-specific, it could also be their sustainability goals according to their ESG strategy. Then we need to perform the impact severity assessment to finally reach the weights. And it has to consider 3 factors, which is the scale, the scope, and the remediability of the impact. And finally, we need to create the matrix. The matrix shown on the screen is an example of the materiality matrix related to the SDGs. We can see in the horizontal axis that is the importance related to the end goals, and in the vertical matrix, in vertical axis, is the importance to the stakeholders. Different thresholds need to be identified, ranging from moderate to high to very high, and here we'll map all the KPIs. For example, let's say we have an application that uses GNSS to be used in smart grids to improve efficiency in power plants. And our stakeholders are the government, and for them, the KPI of energy use in green for environmental is very high, the importance. So it will be there. And then, according to the SDGs, maybe the importance is just in high. So that's how we would map it according to the impact severity assessment previously made. Now, passing again the floor to GTIF.
So how does this matrix translate into actual weights? For this, we decided to use as an end goal the sustainability objectives, and just note this is our interpretation of these objectives. And so we made the impact severity assessment, and as you can see, well, we mapped the different KPIs according to the importance to stakeholders and the importance to the sustainability objectives. So for each of the pillars, the total values of the KPIs have to add up to 100%. So in the case of the environmental pillar, there are 8 KPIs, so if you do 100 divided by 8, we get an average of around 12.5%. And so from this kind of baseline value, we played around with the weights in order to give a higher or lower weight according to the KPI. So as you can see here, for example, air quality is both very high in both importance to stakeholders and to sustainability objectives, and so we gave it a higher weighting of 20%. Biodiversity, on the other hand, is a bit lower, so this is around the average value of 12.5%. And water availability is, again, even lower, so we gave it a weighting of 10%. And by adding all of the weightings for the different KPIs, we get a total of 100%. And this is done for each of the pillars, so also for economic and social.
Now we reach the final step of our methodology, step 4, which is to perform the overall sustainability evaluation. We can represent the KPIs evaluation into 3 different graphs. In the first one, we can see the overall pillar-specific KPI summary, and the last 2, the handprints in green and the footprints in red, weighted. In the first graph, we can see that there's different set-it boxes. In the darkest set-it is a weighted KPI, which has been done using the severity assessment that we did previously, and then also in a lighter color is the unweighted value. Similarly, in the star bar charts, we can see that the weight is depending on the angle. So, for instance, KPI 1 in the handprint graph, it is larger than KPI 4. Then we need to put all this together and see how the KPIs relate to the end goals. And in order to do this, we use the different weights. And we can see here an example of an illustrative way that we can represent, for instance, the SDG score. Once again, we're representing the score from 1 to 5, being 1 here, 1 a smaller area, and 5 a larger area. And we can see how if it's represented in an illustrative way. But this can be adapted according to the user and differently done. For instance, here only the handprints are represented, and in the case study, we also wanted to represent as well the footprints.
So what does this representation look like for GTIF? Since we weren't able to analyze all of the actions for GTIF, this is really just a representation for action 1, so the construction of optimized wind farms. So just bear in mind this is not the final result for the GTIF analysis itself. So here you can see the environmental visual representation for action 1. What we can see here is that we can represent both the handprints and the footprints. And it was important to represent it like this so that the handprints wouldn't compensate the footprints, but we can really see both of these here. You can also notice that, for example, for the fifth KPI, which is material use, since Action 1 didn't have any handprint or footprint for this KPI, there is simply a score of 0. So we did this visual representation for also the other pillars, which are in the additional slides if ever you want to see them. And so the next step here is the representation of the end goals, which in this case were the sustainability objectives. And so this is represented again by the handprints and footprints. So just to note here, this is the combination of both of the actions that we analyzed in our report. And there is also an additional column for not applicable. So by mapping the different KPIs to the objectives, some of them didn't fit in any of the end goals, and so this is represented in the not applicable column. Now I'll pass to Robert to do a summary of the methodology.
Thank you for that in-depth explanation. Now to summarize, the methodology can be broken down into 4 steps. We start off with the application or activity, which we used GTIF for our case study. I'll reiterate that this methodology can be used for other applications, such as data sets from James Webb Telescope. Next, we move to step 1, which is identifying the space mission and the corresponding sectors. For GTIF, that was mobility transition and energy transition. In step 2, we identify the impact indicators and their corresponding KPIs. And then in step 3, we're assigning values from 1 to 5 for all the KPIs. Once we've evaluated all the KPIs, we arrive at step 4, which is when we're representing our end goals through the bar charts and through the starburst charts for both footprints and handprints. Throughout this process, we're also talking to our stakeholders, and these were the stakeholders we identified for GTIF. Now, if it's going to help you remember our methodology, essentially what we've done is created a Nutri-score for the downstream space segment. Now to move on to some uncertainties and limitations that we found for the methodology throughout this project. To start off with the methodology, we immediately recognized that there was a non-exhaustive list of impact indicators, and we hope the list that we did identify would serve as a resource and an example for further users to identify more impact indicators. The methodology is very data intensive and time consuming, and although this strives to be more accurate, it takes a lot of high coordination with the stakeholders and experts over an extended period of time. Even though we have both a retrospective and a prospective approach, we don't specify any time period, and so this is left up to the user. We didn't conduct any sensitivity analysis, so there might be further uncertainties that we haven't identified further down the road. One of the most concerning ones is the misuse of this methodology, which is to represent the data and skew the sustainability impacts. It's important to keep a holistic view and identify all the impact indicators when conducting this methodology to your application. Point 6, this is again reiterating the black box, which is the calculation from impact indicators to KPIs. They aren't consistent, and so this has a risk of either over or underestimating the impacts since we're always using different units. This one's a bit obvious. If we're using bad data, we get bad results. And finally, for the prospective approach, VSA requires forecasting using qualitative approaches, for example, interviewing stakeholders, and these might not reflect the real-world results later on. Now for some GTIF limitations, which we identified when we were conducting the methodology. Starting off with environmental, there are several highly relevant layers, such as forestry and biomass, which weren't validated but used solely as visualization tools. Next, there are several intrinsic uncertainties from sensors and data. For example, we found that Sentinel-2B didn't have the appropriate sensors for the boreal forest found in Austria. Also, GTIF has only been around since 2021, so it hasn't had a lot of time to process all of its data sets. For economic, GTIF was not designed for economic analysis. It focuses heavily on the environmental aspect. This made it difficult to identify impact indicators due to lack of data and processing. Similar story with social. GTIF was not designed for this, and therefore we relied heavily on indirect impacts, and this also further emphasized the need to focus on social to reach sustainability goals. Now finally, for some gaps in our methodology when we applied it to GTIF. Firstly, we found that the identification of actions rather than sectors was more relevant. For the overall impacts, as I mentioned, social, we relied heavily on the indirect impacts. We had to limit ourselves to direct impacts for environmental and economic, since we did not have enough time to consider all of the impacts. This point, data conversion, is again referring to the black box. Even for our limited scale, it was not consistent throughout. A specific point for social is that the quantitative to qualitative step 3.2 was redundant for the indirect impacts that we identified. And I'll stress again, due to our limited timescale, we could only implement our methodology on a limited scope to GTIF, only 2 of the 24 actions we identified, and we were limited on time. And now for some conclusions.
Thank you, Robert. So as we edge towards the end of this presentation, we have a few points which we hope you keep in mind. And what we're trying to say here is, again, reiterate what our methodology is, what can our methodology do, what are its present limitations, and where does this need to go next. So to explain that, the VSA acts as basically a framework to assess the sustainability of any downstream space project in a prospective way, and then use that to later validate the results. The next main conclusion is that it allows for a distinct representation of both the handprint and footprint performances. This is key to highlight because currently in this downstream space sector, we don't have a lot of methodologies which are able to do the same. The next is that the steps and visualizations have been created in a manner that there is a direct possibility of implementation to other applications and case studies. The next is that it's been tailored towards SDG-based or organization-specific end goals. So what we mean to say by this is that the final product should be able to give interesting stories about the sustainability analysis of an organization, which the organization can use to make really powerful decisions. The next is something which we have reiterated throughout the presentation, that for a highly thorough assessment, it's going to be a highly data and process intensive effort. And what this means is that we would require a lot of stakeholder interviews and continuous and concurrent iterations throughout the process. The next is that we definitely need more iterations to the methodology. So presently we've only tested the methodology with one case study, that is the GTIF. So it would definitely be required that we test the methodology with more case studies to focus the scope and eventually the methodology further. And finally, for industry implementation, the methodology will require to be a lot more compact, and also we tested with active case studies in the industry. So what we want to finally say is that from the conception to the completion of this project, our group has tried to do a preliminary study to come up with a downstream-centric methodology. And with the fact that we had a deliverable and a topic team approach, we were able to create a highly dynamic methodology. But saying that, we do really understand that the space industry will have to do a lot of future research and work to make this applicable and, more than that, valuable for the space industry. But one thing which we absolutely have to mention is that the highly iterative process and the fact that it required a lot of interconnected work between the team helped us highlight the fact that the creation of such a methodology is a highly interdisciplinary project, which also requires a lot of international cooperation for having like a fit-for-purpose methodology which can solve for the sustainability, which can help come up with sustainability solutions for the space sector. So with that, we can go with the final few recommendations we have. So we have two types of recommendations, which are one which is user-specific and another for anyone in the space sector hoping to expand the VSA further. So talking first about the user-specific recommendations. The first is that, like we've mentioned, the data identification process of the methodology is highly time-intensive. So wherever possible, we suggest to have a pre-analysis of data availability to be conducted prior to beginning with the VSA methodology process. The next is that an analysis of actions should be exhaustive. So as we've spoken about, every application in the industry will have an exhaustive list of actions. So a thorough analysis to identify all these actions have to be conducted to ensure the quality of the final results. The next is to conduct trade-offs between the KPI and I-squares to add a transdisciplinary lens of analysis. And by this, what we mean to say is that to include more pillar-specific trade-offs. So, for example, there could be an environmental impact indicator which could be giving a positive result, but this same indicator might be giving a negative result for a social or economic I-square. And what this means is that more trade-offs are required to ensure that the final output is actually representative of the real truth, which is currently not considered within the methodology. The last one is to restrict the freedom to select indicators if VSA is to be widely developed for institutional users. So right now, within the framework of the methodology, the user gets the freedom to choose which KPI and which I-squares are to be included. And this allows for an erroneous use or for the results to be skewed to the user-specific views. So it is recommended that organizations have a streamlined approach of which indicators need to be chosen so that the final results for projects can be compared to one another. Now we finally arrive at a few recommendations for the VSA expansion. The very first one is that right now, even though we showed all the steps of this methodology, the methodology is in the form of an academic report, and it needs to be transformed into a concise methodology which can be actually directly applied into the industry. The second is to create a user-friendly Excel-based toolbox for the different steps, that is including the different KPIs and I-squares, which will allow users to add values to these indicators, add their own indicators, calculate the weights for these KPIs, and finally obtain the sustainability scores and visualizations. The third one would be to develop an objective approach to determine the KPI weights and I2 to KPI further. So as Alithia had mentioned, the I2 to KPI conversion is currently still left as a black box. So we're hoping that there will be further research happening in this space to have streamlined weights, which could also be in line with the organizational goals, which will allow that any project or assessment would be actually comparable in results. The final is to dedicate sufficient human and financial resources. So the project is highly time-intensive and human resource intensive. So we hope that any further research would require like a long span of period and sufficient resources to be allocated. We finally hope that our methodology finds a use case for several use cases for implementation within the space industry. And with that, I'd like to pass the floor to CEST for final comments.
So, thank you, Anjali. So with that, our presentation comes to an end. We would like to thank you all very much for being here with us. Just a reminder, this is not just the 5 of us. This is a global team effort from the MSS24 class. You can see us here today. And yeah, thank you very much to everyone who was here listening us, whether it is from YouTube, from the Zoom, also especially for the ones who came here. We are wholeheartedly thanking you for your help. And also, to everyone which has played a part in this project. We are so blessed to have encountered very great, exceptional professionals. We thank you, Marta, and also Matthieu. Thank you very much for your guidelines. Also, we thank Professor Goldman and Professor Tan. Thank you very much for your guidelines also throughout these 7 months, which have been very arduous with a lot of hard work. And yeah, that's it. We open the room for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, you all, for the very nice presentation. So we will start with the partners. So please, Marta, if you'd like to take the floor and ask a couple of questions. So as way of introduction, you are a space sustainability engineer at ESA headquarters in Paris.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I will introduce my activities later on the presentation, but for today's presentation, first of all, thank you very much. Thank you for this amazing work, because we are very, very, very happy about this presentation, about everything that you have delivered across the whole year, and how you've been motivated about this passionate subject that we do both recognize is not an easy journey, and it's definitely not an easy activity to do. So just the fact that you were able to put all this into a nicely presentation over the last hour. Look, usually we are working on many things, and I was 100% concentrated on what you guys were presenting, because it was fascinating. So we did prepare a couple of questions, because we didn't want you to kind of overwhelm you with questions. We can maybe have them later, separate sessions for that. But for me, really, what I wanted to understand today is if you will have the chance to do this TP again, all over from the beginning, but you know what are your time limitations and your resources, what will you do different?
Thank you for the question. So I will hand Alicia the mic to answer.
Thank you. Well, that's a really good question. I think the main thing that I would change personally is that from the beginning, I would have liked to have a 3-pillar approach. At first, this project had an environmental focus, but then later on, after we did the literature review, we decided to change. However, if we had done the literature review since the beginning, considering the 3 pillars, also the social and economic part, it would have saved us also much time later on, which it was a limited resource. And also in the end, it would have been even further developed, and we could have had like a whole view of the whole project since the beginning.
Okay. Because you mentioned that at some point you were some limitation in terms of time, so I could definitely understood that step 1 was your core activities in the methodology is the definition of the impact indicators. But later on in the methodology, lacks of time, so you couldn't come up with the weight of how to come up with the indicators. And I think that is maybe a tip in itself. Like I can tell you today in our activities at ESA, even when we are looking at the LCA and how we want to do a simplified LCA scoring, is a whole set of experts just to decide how we weight these activities to come up with a full score. So it's a very hard activities to be done, and I think yeah, it was quite a big ambitious to do both things. Okay, so then I guess in terms of challenge, what will be your biggest challenge of the TP? And then more interesting, what you have enjoyed the most? What was the most interesting part for you out of this TP?
Okay, so my colleague Anjali will answer the question.
Thank you so much, Marta, for the question. I think a few of them was exactly like how we highlighted in our conclusions as well. But I think the biggest challenge was that when we started, it was a blank canvas for us, and we would just have a lot of discussions, just trying to understand the project, trying to understand how to bring these 3 pillars on the same page, and then understanding that they can't be brought together. So I think that process in itself was really challenging. And the fact is what we've been highlighting all along, that it was very iterative and it required a lot of interconnected work. So as much as we felt that we were prepared and aware about it, when we were actually getting into doing it, it was highly challenging to ensure that we've done a part of the process, the case study implements it, and then we have to come back and change the process. So that required a lot of work, and that was quite an interesting challenge to do it. And I think the last one, which is something which we would have all loved to complete as well, is that for GTIF, we were only able to complete 2 actions out of the 24 which were identified. So that's something which was definitely a challenge to even stand here and show today the effectiveness of our methodology. So I think these were a few challenges for us. But I think all of us will agree that something which we really enjoyed is the fact that finally when we created the methodology, all of us were a part of one deliverable team that is the methodology or the scope or the case study, and also a part of the pillar of a pillar team. So that is, we were either a part of environmental, economic, and social. So what this helped is every time we came into a conversation, we had 2 points of view we were thinking of the problem from. So that was really interesting for us, and it made all our conversations very interesting as well.
Well, thank you for the answer, and definitely, again, congratulations for this great work.
Thank you very much.
And back to you.
My turn, yes. So Matthieu, yes, from Airbus. My turn to say congratulations for your great work, always very well structured. As I said from the beginning, we were always very well hosted. We could see your commitment to the project. Your commitment as a team to yourselves and to the stakeholders. I hope that I see that you certainly have learned a lot from this project, also on sustainability challenges for the space sector. So my question, yes, the first one is about, but I saw that you were already kind of answering it compared to the report. We already saw some also additional improvement to the presentation. Congrats again for that, for taking the feedback into consideration. So yeah, my question was about what the methodology in terms of academics perspective is bringing to the corpus of methodologies, the existing one, the report that you did already in December, January. So what do you think is coming on top, is bringing with this methodology?
Thank you for your question. I will hand out the mic to Robert.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so regarding what we built on from the literature review, I think we adapted a lot of that knowledge and we applied it to the methodology, especially the 3-pillar approach. I think that was, at least for me personally, was one of the biggest findings, that they're all somewhat interconnected. And then the other existing methodologies that you mentioned, our methodology is meant to complement those, not replace them, for the space sector, yeah.
And if I may, I think this one is also more specific to space sector, whereas all of those that you mentioned were more generic or for other sectors. And the second question about yes, what you did learn from this. It's a bit same like Marta, but on another. Yeah, my question is more from the organizational aspects. Yes, as a team, with interactions with the other stakeholders like us, sponsors, but also all the names that we can see here still. So what was the most surprising for you all, and what you take away out of this in terms of, yes, governance and organization?
So I think that I can answer that question myself. So yeah, definitely this team project was such a learning curve for all of us. We all learned a lot. Especially in the organizational aspect that you're talking about. As you can see, for us it was very important how we structure the different teams. And to be honest, it was a kind of personally I felt it like an enterprise experience, because we had to organize ourselves into different teams that have different expertises, not only in the actual execution of the project, but also in the literature review. And that was definitely something challenging, because in the academics that, well, for example, in this master, no one is the boss of anyone. So that was something that the admin team know that, well, they had to do a great job, which they did. And we had to really structure well these teams. And also, it was an enterprise-like experience also because of this, as you said, what you can see, we have contacted a lot of people. In fact, we had a team that was focused mainly on interviewing, which I was part of, and it was great. We had like structured with Excel everything, what information do we need, from who, and it helped us also gain a lot of experience to contact other people, to approach the interviews, and we actually met some very, very, very splendid people who are great professionals from their sector and from who we got a lot of insights. So yeah, I hope this answered your question.
Yeah. Plus the challenge of their time scale not being your time scale.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and also you mentioned before that for the case study you couldn't reach some of the people, so that was also the reason why you didn't have some of the answers. So that's an issue that we found on a daily basis, that it's not easy to collect data and to reach out to the right sources, and you need to have time for that. So that's your lesson learned.
Yeah, so we definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, take it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you. We'll turn to the faculty, and Professor Tan, I think you're online. You are in Houston right now.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. So hello, everyone. It's great to see everyone online. Greetings to the master's students, the faculty, staff, sponsors, and the audience as well. Apologies that I'm not using my video at the moment. I was trying to find a quiet place, and as you can tell, I was unsuccessful given the background noise, and I'm in a little bit of a noisy area. Hopefully you can hear me. I just wanted to say congratulations to the master's class. Your presentation was very polished. Your report had really thoughtful and in-depth analysis. I think, definitely from the faculty point of view, in terms of academic value and reaching your learning outcomes for the team project, I think that you've definitely, reached those. I think in terms of the practicality and action that you'll hear more from the partners, those in the audience, and the chat for the Zoom is pretty active as well. And also many thanks to Professor Bertrand Goldman for organizing the conference, and apologies that I couldn't be there. Also, I wanted to really extend a big thanks of gratitude to our sponsors, Airbus and ISU, with Marta and Matthieu. Thank you for being the ideal partners on this team project, always being present, encouraging, with constructive feedback, and always engaged with the students as well. So thanks for making it at Strasbourg again today. So in terms of the questions, I do have one that really stuck out in my mind while watching your presentation online today. I noticed that with your analysis that there tends to be a lot of categorization of things, right? And us as human beings, we tend to like to categorize things. For example, categorization of the impact indicators, whether something is a handprint or footprint, whether technologies are downstream or upstream. Even like the 3 pillars that you've been talking about, that's really like categorizing of things. But the question to you is, do you think that the lines sometimes blur? Like sometimes when you're analyzing these impacts, maybe it's just like a whole mix of things that we're really trying to attempt to quantify and assess. That maybe, in terms of sustainability and environment, it doesn't quite fit into these really set boxes and boundaries. And how does this type of challenge really affect your assessment and methodology in that? Can you maybe reflect on that? It's a bit related to uncertainty as well. Thanks again.
Well, okay, thank you very much, Professor Tan, for your question. And also we say hi to you, here from Strasbourg. I will hand the mic on to Alicia, who has an answer.
Thank you for the question. Actually, that was a concern that we had when we were developing the methodology. And the first concern was, as we mentioned, like, okay, how do you categorize something that is environmental, social, and economic? Because also sometimes the lines are kind of blurry between economy and social, especially because we have some socioeconomic impacts that they could be kind of considered sometimes social and sometimes economic. However, when we are trying to apply these kind of metrics and these calculations, I think it's important to put boxes, even if sometimes they may not be the right ones, but still these boxes allow us to obtain a result. It's like a medium that we use. So I do think that they are necessary, but sometimes it's true that they may not be perfect. Additionally, like sometimes it did happen that we have some impact indicators that they could apply to different KPIs. And this was the case sometimes. It's not always like this, but sometimes it's the case. And also additionally, like multiple KPIs can apply to an end goal. So in the end, everything is interconnected. It's sometimes we need to find certain barriers which are fictitious in a way, but in order to make these calculations and finally an analysis and obtain a result.
Yeah, I hope this answered your question.
Yep, excellent. Yeah, excellent answer. And I think that's really a good reflection, on all the work that you've done so far. Maybe just like a very quick question, because I know that we're short on time, is I noticed that this has also been in the chat for the Zoom too, is a question about scalability. In terms of like your methodology, do you feel that your methodology is scalable to other case studies? Were there other case studies that you were considering in the interim? Is it scalable to different countries, or maybe like the availability of different data sets and technologies? Any thoughts about that? And I'll end with this question. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much for your question. Aude will now answer.
So regarding the case study, we did look into other possible case studies that we could analyze. So among these, there's also we also looked into Wikeo and EFIS. So EFIS is for tracking forest fires, if I remember correctly. Wikeo is also an Earth observation platform. The case studies that we looked into were mostly Earth observation just because of the data availability. And that was a major aspect here, is to try to analyze platforms that have data in order to kind of apply the methodology. However, in the methodology, this is also applicable to other space projects. So it's not only Earth observation, but also GNSS, telecommunications, and science and exploration. And science and exploration is also an aspect that is less analyzed in the space sector, but this is also a potential application. So, for example, an example that we had mentioned earlier is the JWST images that we can use. So this could also be a potential case study of looking into the data from JWST and trying to apply the methodology to this.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if you have more questions, Suyin?
No, that's everything. Yeah, thanks again.
Thanks.
Congratulations again.
Thanks for joining rather early as well. I pass the floor to Professor Vautrin.
Thank you. And thank you to the team for an excellent presentation. I want to ask you first a question about the big picture of this project. Why was it needed now?
So I think I can answer this question. Well, as we mentioned early in the presentation, we are seeing that more and more there is this trend of having more and more space technologies, more and more objects are being sent into space, and at the same time we see that a lot of regulations are being imposed on other sectors, like for example automotive sectors, and we know that at least in the European Union there is a vision of having greener industries. And we know that someday we'll have to apply with the space sector, especially if it's increasing in the rate that it is. So that is where we actually acknowledge and recognize that there was this need to quantify and know what it is actually the impact that our space activities have in sustainability.
Are there any data about the public's opinion about sustainability in space?
Well, I did some research about some different surveys in the European Commission in 2024, and it is true that for the public, the general public, it is a concern whether rockets are sustainable or not. Also, people do not tend to be knowledgeable about the different fuels that they are using, and they just see a big rocket, launching to space and leaving behind a lot of smoke. So there is this concern, and that's also one of the main reasons that the public is also asking to the space sector whether it is sustainable or not, if that makes sense.
Do you sense that there might be an education gap here? So the public may not understand that there are different fuels with different impacts, for instance?
Again, yeah, we really agree that this is actually a thing, the educational gap that you're talking about, especially since already a lot of startups, launch startups in the European Union are planning to do rockets that are more and more sustainable. So just the fact of making a reusable rocket makes it already more sustainable. So we see that in the European, at least in the European landscape, no one is not going for non-reusable rockets. Reusability is a trend, and it is here to stay, it seems.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will pass the floor to Nicolas Peter now.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's good. It's good also to see smiling faces after so much work and evolution of the project and feedback and so on, so which is good. But I was wondering if it's the end or the beginning, this presentation. What's a potential follow-up you would see, or are you planning to do a spin-off of this project? Because it should have a life. Normally those TPs projects at ISU have a life beyond just the academic exercise that it is and to get a grade for you to for your class. But what are the potential spin-offs you have in mind, or you're already planning to have in the next months?
Okay. So again, it's me. Yeah, that's actually something that I think we all can agree that it is something that we were missing in this TP, because doing this methodology is very tedious and performing, as you can see, like just actually getting to develop it, and the academic exercise of this team project was very, 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 very important, very thorough. We had to actually work a lot on it. So we were missing this aspect of the TPs of bringing this into a reality, into a product, and we didn't have, we sensed that we didn't have enough time, and we actually are a little bit, well, worried about it, because we put a lot of work, and what we were thinking maybe is to just do a simple Excel worksheet that it's already automated, or even later on talking about maybe a web service, or who knows, but definitely, this can be seen as a beginning of something, because what our team project is based on is on setting the basis of something that is not existing yet. So yeah, I would say this is the beginning.
Thank you. Do you foresee to have publications, open publication, conference publication?
Mm-hmm. ISU, yeah, we are probably, well. And we are publicizing this? Well, you answer, yeah, sorry. Anjali will answer better than me.
Exactly just what he said, but we will be presenting it at ISE in October. So, and as a follow-up of that, if we do see anything interesting, we could work on any additional publications as well. But now this is the one in plan.
Thank you, and congratulations again.
Thank you. It sounds like you don't want to leave campus and want to work a little more. I will pass the floor to Professor Hill now.
Good afternoon, and heartiest congratulations on this presentation. I learned a hell of a lot, I have to say, in the last 60 minutes. A few questions. Please, how old is the Green Transition Information Factory concept, and who proposed it initially?
So I will hand the mic to the GTIF expert, Aude.
So the beta version was released in 2023, so it's really a recent platform, and it's still, again, it's in its beta version. Who released it initially? It was in collaboration with ESA, so the GTIF was done with ESA.
Okay, so that's taxpayers' money, I guess.
I assume so.
European tax money, yeah. A nice distinction, thank you. See slide number 18, please. I'd just like clarification. You present nitrogen dioxide, NO2, but there's no mention of N2O, nitrous oxide. I'm just curious about this.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Yes, you present NO2 in the context of emissions, but there's no mention of N2O, nitrous oxide, which is the fourth most significant greenhouse gas.
Well, we just took some random indicators that we had that we had identified in our methodology, and yeah, we took the reduction in nitrous oxide emissions and the CO2 emission saved, but just as random examples, there are many other impact indicators that we have identified throughout this methodology.
Okay, because water, as you know, is the most significant greenhouse gas, but fourth ranked is nitrous oxide. It's often ignored. Slide number 32, please. Now, the thing is, you might have addressed this in your acknowledgement slide, the very last slide, but I'm just curious, who are the experts? Aerospace industry like Airbus, space agencies like ESA, NGOs, all of the above?
Alicia?
Do you mean experts as experts that the user of our methodology needs to consult, or experts in terms of who did we consult?
Yeah, experts you consulted, exactly, yeah.
We consulted different experts. I think actually this is better explained by CEST because he was in the interview team. Yeah. But yeah, we consulted different experts, not only from the case of sustainability, from the case of space, and also in terms of even policymakers and different professionals and even academics in regards of all the parameters that we wanted to address and how best they could be developed. But I don't know if I'm missing anything, baby.
So yeah, well, personally, I was part of a bigger team that Farah was team lead of the interview team, but I got the great pleasure to interview Sabrina Alam, which is here.
Sabrina,
and Sabrina is someone who is super knowledgeable about sustainability and the space sector. And by interviewing people like Sabrina, for example, we got a lot of insights, and we got to actually see that what we were talking about in our project was actually something real, something that it's tangible, something that exists, and it's a concern in the space sector. Not only because Matthieu and Marta had told us about it, but also because Sabrina, who has nothing to do, and like with everything of the TP, she just like, yeah. but yeah, she just.
And also Sabrina is MSS 2017, so she was in your boots not so long ago. Just a final remark, not a question, but Professor Peter is exactly right. You really should follow this work up while it's timely and fresh, presented at least one conference of substance. Again, very, very well done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hugh. So to conclude this set of questions from the faculty, I wanted to thank you again for your work, for the interactions we had over the course of the year. You went through a number of ups and downs, although you pretty much have hidden the downs to us, I think, and Professor Tana, I must say. I really commenting on your answer. to Matthieu regarding how you work together. I think that was really interesting to see how you managed that, how you combined the work and distributed the work, but kept together, especially in the second phase. I think through the first phase of the literature review, you worked like other teams I've seen here. But in the second phase, I think that was a new model that you introduced. I think there's a number of alumni in the room. You did great as well. But I think that was quite interesting what you have done this year. And I encourage you to share your experience with future classes. I would just have one question now. So you organize your methodology around the end goals, of course, of the organizations, and those are specific to the organization. I would like to comment on the benefits of that, so giving freedom to the organizations to define the end goals, but also how that affects the results. And you might think of two very similar projects developed by two different organizations with different end goals would presumably end up with a different score. And how good is it? How does this affect possible comparison, homogeneity of the results?
So to answer your question, Robert.
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat the question again?
So imagine two organizations developing the same project, pretty much, but they would have different end goals. Mm-hmm. With your methodology, they would end up with different scores. How good is that? That would impact the homogeneity of the results of your methodology. So I presume there are benefits that you can comment, but also maybe a hindrance.
I'm going to let Alicia continue, but my first comment would be that we wanted to give users the freedom, depending on what organization they're part of, and whatever they wanted to follow. So for example, the UN SDGs, but if they're part of an organization that had their own sustainability goals, they could apply the same methodology to that and transfer it over to the SDGs as an example.
Well, similarly to what Robert has said, mainly what we wanted to do is that it was one of our considerations as well, is that in the same organization, usually is the organization itself that they want to compare projects among each other. For instance, maybe ISA would want to compare their own projects. So in the organization itself, they should follow the same parameters if they want to really compare projects, because if not, they lose this kind of comparability. But in the case of each organization, of course, they could adapt it to the ESG strategy, which would be better for the organization. But then outside of the organization, we would have the SDGs, maybe as a general sustainability objectives defined by the UN. And maybe in the future, there could be new general sustainability objectives, or they could even be updated, and they could be used in a general context if people want to compare projects outside of their own organization or outside of their scope.
All right, thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. So now we'd like to open the floor for discussion with the room, the hybrid room. Maybe I'll give the floor first to Emmeline, if you can join us, because I think that's really a follow-up comment maybe on Nicolas' question and your remarks as well.
Yes. Yeah, hi from Houston.
If you could maybe, sorry, Emmeline, introduce yourself very briefly.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so this is Emmeline Pat-Dahlstrom. I'm also an ISU alumni. I am the current TP chair for one of the TPs here at SSP24 with environmental evaluations of space activities and ventures, which is very similar to or TP, which is why this is very important kind of to us. The difference is that we only have, a few weeks as opposed to you having like a whole year. We're also just going to be focusing on environmental as opposed to the 3 pillars that you have. So yeah, riffing off of what Nicola talked about the TP afterlife. This is an opportunity for potentially doing something from what you've already done and then passing it on to potentially more research or work that we can actually do here. So I guess the question to you then is that, yeah, what are the potential gaps, or what do you think should the SSP TP, which is fairly similar, do as a kind of like an offshoot of what you've done?
Could you repeat what the SSP TP is about?
Yeah, so the TP, the current theme right now is environmental evaluations of space activities and ventures. So very, very similar to basically what you have. But because we only have a very short period of time, we're honing in on environmental as opposed to the 3 pillars. And we also have only a very short period of time, as you can see. So yeah, given what you've done, and then also you've already talked about in your conclusion some of the things that you would have wanted to do after, what would your recommendations be for this TP?
Okay, so Robert will answer this question.
Yeah. Thank you, Emily, for your question. Or can you... Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for your question. And yeah, that sounds like a very similar project. My first thought would be to try to not limit yourself to environmental only. I understand that
we only have like basically, what is it, like 2 weeks of actual intensive work on the TP and then a number of sessions.
Okay. Well, then I guess I would try to start, then if you want to focus on the environmental, start with developing, as we mentioned, like an Excel-based toolkit to implement this methodology, because right now it only exists in our report and otherwise can't really be used as efficiently. And if we found that if there was a toolkit to do that, it would make the whole thing the iterative process of it a lot more streamlined, and you could follow the overview of your evaluation a lot easier. Did you want to add anything?
Do you want to? Okay. Anjali will add something else.
Yeah, just to add on to what Robert said, just to like focus on one thing which an environment-based study could solve could be that we re-emphasize that we have a section of going from like the indicator to KPI as a black box. So that is something which can be solved just looking at just the environmental value as well. So how to identify like what kind of weights need to be assigned for different indicators. So that's definitely a very crucial step, but also like a very single step which can be solved for, like tackled and solved for. So that would be an interesting problem to see if it can be answered.
And if I may add, well, I would also say that we have done a lot of the work, so you can look at the Vitruvian space assessment as well. I suppose we allow you. You will avoid a lot of thorough research and yeah.
Yeah. And I invite you as well as basically experts to kind of like talk to the participants as well during the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Matthieu, would like to follow up?
Yeah, to follow up on that, yes. If I may, in the report, there's not everything. I saw today the gaps, analysis, recommendations, how to move forward, and so on, which is more putting the reflections beyond. So my question is, will you update the report, or will you at least share the slides? Because that's what you have presented is answering probably a lot of the question, a big part of the question just asked before.
So yeah, thanks to like your feedback and everyone's feedback, we actually got to improve it for this presentation, and yeah, we will update it and share the slides. So yeah.
Thank you very much. There are a number of questions, even discussions in the chat. So maybe we can turn to Charles. Do you want to take the floor and ask the question you prepared?
Sure. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Perfect. So hello, everyone. My name is Charles, and I'm happy to see a lot of familiar faces in the room, both virtually and in person. So I'm working for SES, and I'm dealing with life cycle assessment, climate action, space sustainability, and I'm also an ISU alumni. So I'm based in Luxembourg, where the headquarters of SES is. Hello. And yeah, I mean, amazing presentation, very, very well done. I was in your shows just like 2 years ago, so I know what that means and the level of preparation you need to put into that. So my question was pretty much simple, or maybe not. It was a bit more technical instead. I just wanted to know, from the beginning of your study, you mentioned comparability and analysis, right? And I'm impressed by the level of details and all the area you managed to address and to kind of try to simplify the complexity behind. However, most of the elements that you have captured could be applicable to other industries. So it's a little bit difficult to see why, how that this tool is specific to the space industry, because the space industry has some very well-known, impact that are across the various segments, the launch, the space, the manufacturing, etc. And on top of that, there is a need to better, I would say, quantify or compare different systems, like in LEO, in MEO, in GEO, or different type of missions, Earth observation, communication. Looking into some existing standard, like the PFCL, like Product Environmental Footprint category rule, or just the way of normalizing the result from the life cycle assessment that you mentioned. What is, how can I ask this in a simpler way? How do you consider the existing framework to better justify your scoring methodology and the applicability to the space industry?
Okay, first of all, thank you.
I hope it's clear enough.
Thank you very much for your wishes. Thank you. We wholeheartedly thank you for your comments. And I see that there's like two questions within one. The first question, which is that it can be applicable to other methodologies. I think I can answer it. And I will go back to like our literature review. So yeah, as you're saying, our methodology has some things that can be maybe translating to other industries, but that is no wonder, because actually we didn't invent a methodology. At the end of the day, what we're doing is developing a methodology to evaluate sustainability. The way we did that was looking at different methodologies, but also one of the most important steps that we did, I think that we learned a lot from, was looking at other industries. Looking at other methodologies that are developed in different industries really helped us a lot to understand how to approach this very, very tedious task, which is to quantify or to give a score or a result of a certain activity and its sustainable performance. So yeah, it's not something very, let's say, rare that our methodology is not of world. It is based on other methodologies used in different industries, but it also inherently has some aspects that are tightly related to the space sector, which, for example, in step one, which we explained, we are focusing mainly on in identifying different downstream applications in the 4 different types of missions that we chose to tackle, which are Earth observation, telecommunications, human spaceflight, and GNSS. So yeah. And the second question, if you could repeat it, because you're gonna. Oh, Anjali remembers, and she will answer.
You can get it confirmed. Okay. I just want to confirm before answering that you wanted us to explain how for different missions in LEO or GEO or MEO, how our methodology can be used to assess that, right? Okay.
Yes, and also how those different missions will influence the result, kind of.
Sorry, how does? Could you please repeat your last part?
At the end, it's just to know how those different missions will influence the impact that you will calculate at the end. Because I just assume that having maybe a mission for telecommunication using one single satellite in GEO may not have the same impact than using 100 LEO satellite, right? And I'm just thinking loud, like how that will influence the impact that will be observed on the downstream application.
Got it. Yeah, to answer your first question first, and I think you really introduced us with like that explanation you gave. When we talk about the fact that it's a downstream specific solution and the fact that we have these 4 missions, for example, if we take telecommunication and if we have satellites in GEO and if we have satellites in MEO, and we're then trying to assess the downstream impact of these activities. For example, if we are looking at the throughput and if we are looking at the economic benefit and the social benefit of just particularly that metric, we'd be able to understand which is a better impact or what kind of a trade-off is there between a mission in GEO or MEO. And similar to that, we could also differentiate between different maybe satellite services we have in LEO for Earth observation, or maybe even between different Sentinel missions to understand across like the 3 pillars on the different impacts they have, and again go back and understand if a mission in a particular, if a mission in LEO is probably better than a mission in MEO, or if those factors have an impact. So even though it's a downstream focused methodology, it is closely related to the space segment and understanding which is more viable or which is more useful for sustainable use on Earth. And on your second question of how are these differences directly flowing into our methodology, I think it has a direct impact. So as CEST was mentioning, our very first step is analyzing the applications and the level of, for example, the level of information which a LEO satellite or a LEO constellation and a GEO constellation can provide would be completely different, which will have a huge impact on the data and any kind of further analysis and the quality of the metrics which will be finally obtained. I hope that answers your question.
It's good enough, so thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, all of you. If there are questions in the room, I'd be happy to take them. In the chat, we have a question, so I think maybe I have to read it. I'm not sure if you can connect. Jyoti Deb, you are in Munich. I don't know if you can read your question. Otherwise, I will. You're a member, in particular, of the Advisory Council to the Airbus Foundation, and working also as a project lead social impact innovation at the Chief Sustainability Office, also in Munich. And so again, if you can connect and read your question, do it. Otherwise, I will. In particular, do you have any examples of market valuation or financial numbers for indicators like change in quality of life? So this is one of the indicators that you discussed. So yeah, better or worse due to implementation of the product. So market valuation, financial numbers for those really qualitative elements or I-squares.
Alicia has an answer for that.
Well, the market valuation was done, first of all, it was considered for just the economic pillar. It wasn't considered for the social, although maybe it could. The only problem is that you need to have a market, like that product needs to be in the market, or you need to do an extrapolation, which sometimes becomes not as precise, of certain goods and products. So in the case of quality of life, I believe that is hard to market, although sometimes there's other methods that could be applied in order to identify these changes in quality of life. Like, for instance, when you buy a house, you can quantify if people are buying houses in a certain area because of like the lack of noise pollution, or because maybe they have parks near to their house. So that could be better done, but that is shown by other methods, like, for instance, the revealed preferences. But market valuation wouldn't be applicable, I think, for that case.
All right, okay, thank you. We have other questions. Pierre, can you join and ask your question? Pierre Mattei, you're the founder of Grape Hope Company, incubated here at ISU. Do you want to ask your question?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Goldman. And I'd like to start congratulating all these brilliant students. It was really awesome to hear you today. So thank you for the opportunity. And my question is quite simple. I think most of it is already touched by other lectures here today. And but I was wondering how to evaluate impact indicators when the satellite services are applied in different countries. One of you have touched, for example, has mentioned Australia. But in particular, when you have multi-layers to as the case when you use multiple sources. I'll give an example to make it simple. In case we are using data fusion on satellite images, drones images, and IoT sensors, and we do that in different countries. Take into account the sustainability concept we have here, meaning we have to take into account the economy, the environment, the social, the level of employment. How can I evaluate the impact in France, in Australia, in Nigeria, in Brazil, in the US? How can we evaluate the same project in such different scenarios? It may be with difference in the application of technology, or even how easy for a specific country, specific people to use this technology, to apply it properly. So I'm not sure if the question was clear, if you need some clarification.
Yeah, I think maybe can relate it to GTIF or like to answer.
So the methodology was really designed to be applied to a specific project or to a specific activity. In this case, so the fact that data comes from different countries, what is going to be affected in this case is the data gathering step. So since the methodology is supposed to be applied to a specific activity, the data can come from multiple sources, and this may include different sources from different countries as well. So in this case, it's going to be, I guess in a way, limited to the platform that is going to be analyzed or the activity itself. So for example, yeah, if I do relate it to GTIF, GTIF does take data from Earth observation satellites, so that are mostly European-based. However, other platforms that could use this methodology could use data from other satellites as well. So for the impact indicators, the origin of the data itself, I guess, won't really impact the final valuation of the impact indicator. I'm not sure if this answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. Sarba, do you want to take the floor and ask your question? And if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly. Or maybe we can read your question on the screen. So I think you're doing this, Robert. Go ahead. So, yeah, so Sarba asked, did you take into account the specific targets and indicators of the SDGs in your methodology? Well, I think maybe that was asked earlier, but go ahead.
Did we take into account, sorry?
The specific targets and indicators of the SDGs of the UN in your methodology.
Alicia will answer the question.
The answer, I mean, is that sort of say, yes, we did. We did look into the SDGs and the different targets and everything. Even also when we were developing the impact indicators, we looked into also considerations that were taken into account in order to achieve the SDGs. And this we then made them to be impact indicators, and we searched from different ideas, but one of the ideas that we used was the indicators of the SDGs.
Okay, thanks. I don't know if you can connect now or not yet. I think it would be better if you would.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm a very noisy place, so I had to find somewhere quiet to go. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Saba. I'm MSS20. And I also work a lot on the intersections between space and sustainability. So this was a very interesting presentation for me. During my MSS, I did my internship with ESA Clean Space, which works a lot on this topic specifically. So one of my questions was, were you able to engage with them on their methodology? They use the LCA. They have a lot of research going on in that area. So I was curious if you explored that or incorporated it in any way.
So yeah, actually we were very lucky to partner with Enrico Tormena, who had been working in this project that you were mentioning. And actually we got to do a workshop in which, very early in the beginning, after finishing the literature review, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and we actually got to learn a lot about sustainability, the approaches that they have, and also to learn things that we could later on incorporate to our methodology.
So I guess my question is, so the way I understood your methodology, it's not using LCA, correct? So it's kind of a parallel methodology. What are the benefits of using your methodology over LCA, for example, or other existing methodologies?
Actually, our methodology is actually complementable to the LCA, because the LCA focuses on the upstream, and that's actually something that we looked at, which was that there was a methodology to evaluate sustainability, but it was focusing mainly on the upstream. We flipped a little bit the situation, and we were thinking of trying to find out a way, and that was a very big challenge, to evaluate the downstream aspect of space missions. That also entailed an internal debate that we had. Well, until when do we consider that something is the result of a downstream application or not? No, so yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not upstream.
Yeah, it's not upstream, by the way. Yeah.
Just to complement to what you said, so just to clarify, so LCA is for the evaluation of the environmental negative impact. So definitely this methodology can be complementary to that, but here what we are trying to actually do is to evaluate the positive impact. So in order to get to the net impact, you have to, you can complement with the approach of LCAs. But yeah, we know that today the LCA is well established in the upstream, and but it's more that the difference is more in terms of the evaluation of the impacts than where it's being applied.
No, nothing to add, yeah. Yeah, the only thing is that LCA is really an environment footprint, and your methodology is environment, social, economic footprint and handprint for the space activities, mainly starting from the downstream, but also it could be, I will say a few words on that, it could be also conversely used for upstream applications. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. And maybe, so I'll give the floor to Yves Nominé, a neighbor, and then maybe to Léa, if you'd like possibly to conclude the discussion with a couple of questions, but first.
Okay, so I'm Yves Nominé. I'm working at the USBS, the engineering school in biotechnology, very close to here. And I'm not here for biotechnology, I don't think so at least. It's more because I'm also in charge of a university diploma, trying to do the link between engineering activity and sustainability. Okay, so first of all, I want to thank you about your presentation. Very challenging for at least two aspects. So one of them is usually after the lunch, it's nap time, and you have been able to wake up us. So that's already a first challenge. No, so more seriously, in your presentation, you have done a great job trying to combine quantitative and qualitative data. And for all people working in data analysis, we all know how difficult it is. My question now is more related to something close to what has been asked before, but not fully. It's usually when we're doing an estimate of carbon footprint or sustainability, if we want to talk about that, usually we do that at one time t, and then we are reproducing the estimate, let's say 2 years later, and then we are trying to compare in order to see whether we have an improvement or not. Can you comment on that, and what would be the impact of the methodology that you have used? Because you say that you don't have a time frame. I mean, you did not stop the study at a given time. So could you comment on it, please?
So Aude will answer this question.
So as we were applying the methodology and while we were trying to collect the data, this is one aspect that was kind of an obstacle, is to determine what is the timescale. And something we came to the conclusion of is that the timescale is going to be different according to the pillars. So the timescale for environment is not going to be the same as the timescale for the social aspect of it. For example, the social aspect is generally going to be on a much larger timescale to kind of see the effects of what GTIF can bring. Yeah, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the first part of the question? I think that was the second part.
No, the main question was how could you change the methodology, or what would you have to change in your methodology if you want to reproduce the estimate of sustainability in, let's say, in 2 years in order to compare with the results that you've got now?
Yeah. And so this is the other aspect when we're trying to evaluate the handprint. The handprint it's always going to be a comparison with a before and after. There's not really a way to evaluate this handprint without having a baseline value. And so of course, it's going to be a challenge to get the data, but, and this is especially a challenge for the prospective analysis, but we always have to try to find this baseline value of what would happen without the application that we're evaluating, and then trying to forecast what would be the impact of this application on this impact indicator. So in the case, for example, if I take a random example of job creation, so this comparison for the data will really have to be this, trying to see how many jobs there would be without the application, and then how many jobs there would be with the application, and this comparison would be the evaluation of the handprint for the impact indicator.
Add on to that, just to like a quick comment. Yeah, then it would be that would be the perspective, and then what maybe to also answer like in 2 years, how can we make sure that those projections that we made came true? Then in that case, that's why we were saying that we have both a prospective and retrospective analysis. In that case, the retrospective would be just if we estimated that we created 1,000 jobs, then 3 years later, we come again and we analyze what has happened, and actually maybe it was just 200, and we overestimated that handprint. So that's why we are saying that it's not only making those projections, but also in the end tracking if they came true. To see the problem here is the time frame, as I mentioned, that would be different depending on the pillar, and maybe for some people it would be 10 years. For others, they would just want it to be like in 2 years. How has it changed?
I think we're a bit over time, but maybe I think Leah, you had a number of questions. I don't think we have time to address all of them, but if you'd like to ask one or two, and please introduce yourself briefly. I think you were back online. Otherwise, maybe I can read it. Let's see. Yes. Okay. Let me take one question that Leah asked. So she's an astronomer.
Oh,
okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, please.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Leah Bonnefoy. I'm an astrophysicist at the Laboratoire de Météorologie Dynamique. So I'll bring a slightly different point of view from everyone else. And so I can summarize one question that essentially I'm very confused that manufacture and launch are excluded from the analysis when they are obviously hugely important for the impact of space missions, whereas you included very, very far remote implications, which are impossible to quantify, like how satisfied will people be with the installation of wind turbines in an area that might be relevant according to the data from this space mission, which is very, very remote. And these are impossible to quantify and to exhaustively list. So I think this would lead to very, very skewed results that are very subjective according to who is using this methodology and writing and doing the report and calculating the score. And it might lead to very dangerous applications of people using it for their own benefit and to justify whatever they want to do. So how would you justify this methodology and the safety of its use?
Well, thank you for your observations. I will hand the microphone to Anjali to answer.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that your observations are really true, and that is something which we discussed a lot during the entire process of the methodology creation. So for the first part on why launch and manufacturing haven't been included, there are several methodologies already existing in the space industry which focus on evaluating the upstream, and one which is very heavily used is the LCA methodology, which is definitely used across all industries. So we wanted to have a methodology to focus on the downstream impact of space applications, and especially the positive impacts of space applications. So that was kind of the focus of our methodology. And to the example which you have mentioned here, that is absolutely right, and it is not a direct impact of the space mission. So that is why we kind of explained again during our presentation that for the case study which we used for our methodology, GTIF, it was not ideal for an economic or a social evaluation. Especially for a social evaluation, it made it very difficult to get any kind of a direct indicator. So throughout our methodology, we've looked at both direct impact indicators and indirect indicators. And while we have prioritized throughout our entire reporting to have direct indicators. In the case of this case study, especially for social analysis, we've had to rely on a few indirect indicators just to show the implementation of the methodology and how can it be used to calculate those results. But like we again emphasized in our limitations and future recommendations, it would be really important for users at an organizational level to have like a limit on, a further limit on the system boundaries of what kind of indicators can be chosen depending on the application. And additionally, the one way in which, for example, the satisfaction or dissatisfaction of people can be erroneously used is if the weight of such an indicator is really high. So we've already included in our indicator to KPI conversion that the weight of an indicator would depend on its impact on sustainability and its impact to the organizational goals. So that is something which we have already considered, but the other is that we have emphasized again, over and again that further work will have to be done to ensure that there are more stricter system boundaries so that organizations can't misuse it. We absolutely understand that that is a limitation which the methodology currently has. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
All right, I think it's time to close this session. I think the students must be exhausted, and maybe some of us. Thanks a lot for joining, everyone online and here. We will continue after a short break, so we have a bit of a coffee break now. I see people nodding on the stage. We should definitely do that. So we will reconvene, let's say, a bit later than planned. Let's reconvene at 4 p.m. I think there are some people on YouTube. We will not broadcast the second part, where a number of space experts will comment on this and explain how that fits into the organization or how they use this kind of tools. And so let's reconvene at 4. If you are on YouTube and would like to continue watching, maybe you can drop an email to tas@isunet.edu to get the Zoom link, or maybe just email anyone you know in this room who will tell you the right link, Zoom room. So thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks so much for your efforts, for your presentation, and the Q&A that you've just performed. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Get together, we'll get a photo.